The western plains stretched endlessly beneath a merciless sun, their parched grasses rustling like whispers of the dead. The road, if it could be called that, was little more than wagon ruts carved deep into cracked earth, testament to countless journeys of hope and despair. Dust devils danced across the horizon, spinning their lonely waltz in the heat shimmer that made the world seem to breathe and bend. Through this desolate landscape, a solitary figure moved with the slow, painful gait of the exhausted. Her bare feet, once tender and pale, had turned leather-tough and bloody from days of walking. Each step sent small clouds of red dust swirling around her ankles, coating her torn calico dress until its original blue was nothing but a memory. The fabric, patched and repatched with scraps of flour sacks, hung loose on her thin frame. Clara Mae Thompson was 22, though the hardness in her green eyes suggested she'd lived far longer. Her auburn hair, once her mother's pride, hung in tangled ropes down her back, bleached by sun and gritty with road dust. She'd stopped counting the days since she'd fled the farm outside Topeka, stopped measuring the miles that separated her from the nightmare she'd called home. The memory came unbidden, as it always did when exhaustion wore down her defenses. Her father's voice, thick with whiskey and rage. "You killed her, girl, sure as if you'd put a gun to her head." The accusation had become his favorite refrain after her mother died in childbirth, the baby dying with her. Clara had been 12 then, old enough to help but too young to save anyone. 10 years of bearing that burden, 10 years of his fists and curses, until the night he'd come to her room with intentions that finally broke something inside her. She'd left with nothing but the clothes on her back and her mother's wedding ring sewn into the hem of her dress. The ring was gone now, traded 3 towns back for a heel of bread and directions west, always west, toward the setting sun and the promise of places where no one knew her name or her shame. The sound reached her before she saw its source, the distant percussion of hammers on wood, the occasional shout of men at work, the whinny of horses. Silver Creek materialized from the heat haze like a mirage given substance. It wasn't much, a main street of false front buildings trying to look more permanent than they were, a few cross streets trailing off into collections of shacks and tents. But it had what she needed, anonymity and the possibility of work. As she entered the town proper, Clara straightened her spine despite the screaming protest of her muscles. She'd learned that showing weakness in a frontier town was like bleeding in shark-infested waters. The afternoon sun slanted across the street, casting long shadows from the buildings and illuminating the dust motes that hung perpetually in the air. The Lucky Dollar Saloon dominated one side of the street, its bat-winged doors releasing bursts of piano music and male laughter whenever someone passed through. Across from it stood Hendrick's Dry Goods, the Imperial Hotel, and a handful of other establishments that formed the commercial heart of Silver Creek. Men lounged on wooden sidewalks, some reading week-old newspapers, others simply watching the world with the patience of those who had nowhere particular to be. It was then she saw him. He stood apart from the others, leaning against a post outside the saloon with the stillness of a man comfortable in his own solitude. Unlike the cowboys who strutted and preened, he seemed to occupy his space without apology or assertion. His hat was pulled low, but she could see the angular line of his jaw, the week's worth of stubble that couldn't quite hide a scar running from his left ear to the corner of his mouth. His clothes were worn but clean dark pants, a gray shirt that had seen better days, and a leather vest that had molded itself to his lean frame through years of wear. But it was his eyes that stopped her, dark as coffee. They tracked her movement with a quality of attention that was neither predatory nor dismissive. He watched her the way a man might watch a hawk circling overhead, with interest but without the need to possess or interfere. In a world where men's gazes usually meant trouble, his observation felt oddly neutral, almost protective. Clara forced herself to look away, to continue down the street as if she belonged there. Her feet left bloody prints in the dust, but she didn't slow. She'd learned to push through pain, to let it sharpen her focus rather than dull it. Well, what have we here?" The voice came from her left, where 3 men had materialized from the shaded alley between buildings. The speaker was young, probably not much older than herself, with the kind of aggressive confidence that came from never having faced real consequences. His companions flanked him, grinning with anticipation of sport. "Looks like a stray cat, boys," the young man continued, moving to block her path. "Pretty little thing, even under all that dirt. You lost, sweetheart?" Clara stopped but didn't retreat. She'd faced worse than whiskey-brave boys. "Just passing through," she said, her voice hoarse from thirst but steady. "Passing through to where? Ain't nothing past Silver Creek but desert and Apache territory." He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell the tobacco on his breath. "Maybe you should stick around. I could find work for a girl like you." The implications in his tone were clear. Clara's hand moved instinctively to her side, where she'd once carried her mother's sewing scissors, but those too were long gone, traded for food somewhere in Kansas. "The lady said she's passing through." The voice was quiet, but carried the kind of authority that came from absolute confidence. The stranger from the saloon had moved without her noticing, now standing a few feet away with his thumbs hooked casually in his gun belt. He hadn't drawn his weapon, hadn't even shifted his posture to suggest violence, but something in his presence made the three men reassess their situation. "This ain't your concern, Harland," the young man said, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. "Maybe not," the man called Harland agreed. "But I'd take it as a personal favor if you boys found something else to do this afternoon." There was a moment of tension, the kind that could go either way in a town where violence was always just beneath the surface. Then the young man laughed, trying to save face. "Sure, Harland. We were just being friendly." He touched his hat mockingly to Clara. "Ma'am." They sauntered away, their departure a careful balance between not showing fear and not prolonging the confrontation. Clara found herself alone with her unexpected defender, the street suddenly feeling very wide and empty. "Thank you," she managed, the words feeling inadequate. He studied her for a moment, taking in her condition with those dark eyes that seemed to miss nothing. "There's a water trough behind the livery stable. Bartender at the Lucky Dollar sometimes has leftover stew he'll share if you ask polite." He touched the brim of his hat. "Ma'am." Before she could respond, he was walking away, his stride unhurried but purposeful. Clara watched him go, something stirring in her chest that had nothing to do with gratitude. She'd been in enough towns to recognize the different breeds of men who inhabited them, the dreamers and schemers, the broken and the breaking, the predators and the prey. But this man, this Harland, didn't fit neatly into any category she knew. The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that promised another scorching day tomorrow. Clara made her way to the livery stable, finding the water trough he'd mentioned. She drank deeply, then splashed the tepid water on her face and arms, watching the dirt swirl away in brown rivulets. As she cleaned herself as best she could, she thought about the look in his eyes, not pity, which she would have hated, and not desire, which she would have feared. It was something else entirely. A recognition, perhaps, as if he'd seen in her something familiar. The scar on his face suggested he too knew about violence, about the marks life left on a person that went deeper than skin. Night was falling by the time she made her way to the Lucky Dollar's back door. The sounds from inside were louder now, the evening crowd warming up for whatever passed for entertainment in Silver Creek. She knocked hesitantly, prepared to run if necessary. The door opened to reveal a massive black man in a stained apron, his face scarred but kind. "Help you, miss? I was told. Someone said you might have some leftover stew?" He looked her over, his expression softening. "Harland sent you, did he? That man needs to stop collecting strays." But he was already turning back inside. "Wait here." He returned with a bowl of stew that was mostly potatoes and carrots, but smelled like heaven to her empty stomach. "There's a boarding house on 3rd Street, Mrs. Doyle's place. She might have work for room and board if you're staying." Clara took the bowl with hands that shook slightly. "Thank you, Mr. Solomon, and you're welcome." He started to close the door, then paused. "Word of advice. Miss, this town's got more shadows than most. You seem like you're running from something. Ain't my business what, but Silver Creek has a way of bringing folks' troubles right along with them. You be careful." The door closed, leaving Clara alone with her meal and her thoughts. She found a relatively clean spot against the building's wall and ate slowly, savoring each bite. The stew was simple but filling, the first hot meal she'd had in days. As she ate, she watched the town transform with nightfall. Lanterns were lit, casting pools of yellow light that made the shadows between buildings seem deeper. The respectable citizens retreated to their homes while a different population emerged, gamblers and drifters. Women in bright dresses with tired eyes, men who wore their guns like others wore their Sunday suits. Somewhere in this maze of light and shadow was the man who'd helped her, probably back at his post by the saloon, watching the world with those dark, knowing eyes. Clara finished her stew and set the bowl by the door where Solomon would find it. Tomorrow she would look for work, for a place in this town that seemed balanced on the edge of civilization and chaos. But tonight, she simply sat and listened to the sounds of Silver Creek, the tinny piano music, the burst of laughter, the occasional gunshot in the distance that no one seemed to pay much attention to. She thought about her mother, about the life she'd fled, about the blood on her feet and the road that had brought her here. And she thought about a scarred man named Harland who'd looked at her like he understood what it meant to carry ghosts, who'd offered help without seeking payment or gratitude. In a world that had shown her mostly cruelty, that simple kindness felt like a candle flame in the darkness, small, fragile, but impossibly precious. The stars emerged one by one in the vast western sky, and Clara May Thompson, barefoot and alone, but no longer quite as lost, began to hope that she might have finally run far enough. The morning sun had barely crested the horizon when Clara stood before Mrs. Doyle's boarding house, a narrow two-story building that seemed to lean slightly to the left, as if perpetually bracing against the prairie wind. The paint was peeling, and the sign hanging from the porch read, "Clean beds, hot meals," in faded letters that suggested both promises might be relative terms. Mrs. Eugenia Doyle answered the door on the third knock, a woman who might have been 40 or 60, with steel-gray hair pulled back so tightly it stretched the corners of her eyes. She wore black from collar to hem, the uniform of perpetual mourning that many frontier widows adopted. Her gaze swept over Clara with the efficiency of someone who'd learned to make quick judgments about character and solvency. "No charity cases," she said before Clara could speak. "And I run a respectable establishment. No gentlemen callers after 8, no liquor in the rooms, and absolutely no trouble." "I'm looking for work, ma'am," Clara said, lifting her chin. "I can clean, cook, do laundry. I don't need charity, just a chance to earn my keep." Mrs. Doyle's eyes narrowed, taking in Clara's worn dress, her bare feet, the determined set of her jaw. "Where are your people?" "Dead." The lie came easily, in all the ways that mattered. It was true. Husband? Never had one. This seemed to surprise Mrs. Doyle. A young woman traveling alone without the ghost of a husband to explain her circumstances was unusual enough to be suspicious. "Where did you come from?" "Back east." "Kansas." Clara met her gaze steadily. "I've got no references, Mrs. Doyle, but I'm not afraid of hard work. Give me a day's trial. If you're not satisfied, I'll move on." The older woman considered this, her fingers drumming against the doorframe. Finally, she stepped aside. "Trial starts now. There's wood needs splitting for the stove, floors need scrubbing, and I've got 6 rooms of linens to wash. You'll sleep in the cellar storage room. It's that or nothing. Meals are at 6, noon, and 6. You eat after the paying guests. Any stealing, any trouble, and you're out before you can blink." Clara nodded. "Thank you, ma'am." "Don't thank me yet," Mrs. Doyle muttered, leading her through a parlor that smelled of old smoke and lavender water. "And find some proper shoes. This is a Christian establishment, not some heathen camp." The work was brutal. Clara's hands, already raw from her journey, split and bled as she hauled water and scrubbed floors with lye soap that burned like acid. Mrs. Doyle supervised with sharp eyes and sharper tongue, finding fault with every corner Clara cleaned, every dish she washed. But Clara had endured worse. She worked in silence, refolding linens when told they weren't square enough, re-scrubbing floors that looked clean to her eyes but not to Mrs. Doyle's exacting standards. The boarding house had 8 rooms, 6 currently occupied. Clara glimpsed the boarders as they came and went, a traveling merchant with sample cases that smelled of patent medicine, 2 miners who paid weekly and tracked mud everywhere, a thin man in spectacles who claimed to be a surveyor for the railroad, and an elderly woman who never emerged from her room except for meals. It was while hanging laundry in the side yard that Clara first heard the talk that would soon dominate the town. 2 women had stopped by the fence, their voices carrying clearly in the still morning air. Charlie Brennan says they hit the stagecoach outside Marble Canyon. One was saying, "Killed the driver and the man riding shotgun. Took everything worth taking. The Morrison gang," the other replied, lowering her voice as if the name itself might summon them. "They say Jake Morrison would as soon kill a man as look at him. The marshal in Tucson's put a bounty on them. But who's going to collect? Half the lawmen in the territory are too scared to go after them. Well, Silver Creek better prepare itself. They've been working their way north, hitting every town along the route. Mark my words, we're next." They moved on, leaving Clara with a chill despite the warming sun. She'd thought she'd run far enough to escape violence, but it seemed violence had a way of finding people no matter where they fled. That afternoon, as she beat dust from a rug in the backyard, she spotted Harland across the street. He was loading supplies onto a pack horse with methodical precision: flour, coffee, ammunition. He moved with the easy efficiency of a man who'd done this countless times before, who knew exactly what he needed for wherever he was going. Their eyes met briefly. He touched his hat brim in acknowledgement, and she found herself nodding back before she could think about it. Then Mrs. Doyle's voice cracked like a whip from inside, demanding to know why she heard rug beating instead of floor scrubbing. And the moment passed. That evening, after the boarders had been fed their meal of tough beef and boiled potatoes, Clara sat in the kitchen eating her portion while Mrs. Doyle tallied accounts at the table. "You did passable work today," the older woman admitted grudgingly. "You can stay on. Room and board plus $2 a week." "That's generous, considering you've got no experience and no references." It wasn't generous. Clara had made more than that working in a factory in Kansas City before things went bad, but she had little choice. "Thank you, Mrs. Doyle. You'll need proper attire. Can't have you wandering around barefoot like some savage. There's a trunk in the attic with clothes that might fit. Belonged to a boarder who skipped out on her bill. You can have what fits. Cost comes out of your wages." Clara nodded, grateful despite the additional debt. Her feet were toughened but not invulnerable, and the wooden floors had left splinters she'd been pulling out by candlelight. "And stay away from that Harlan fellow," Mrs. Doyle added sharply. "I saw you making eyes at him. I wasn't—" "Don't argue with me, girl. That man's trouble." "Oh, he's quiet enough. Keeps to himself. But there's something not right about a man who lives alone out in the desert, who comes to town only for supplies and spends his time watching everyone like he's waiting for something. Some say he was a soldier, others say an outlaw. Either way, he's not the sort a respectable girl should notice." Clara bit back her response. She owed this woman too much to argue. And besides, what did it matter? She hadn't come to Silver Creek looking for anything but anonymity and survival. That night, in her cellar room that smelled of potatoes and damp earth, Clara tried on the clothes from the trunk. They were years out of fashion but serviceable. 2 dresses, a worn pair of boots that almost fit, some undergarments that had seen better days. Looking at herself in the cracked mirror propped against the wall, she hardly recognized the woman staring back. The soft Kansas girl was gone, replaced by someone harder, leaner, marked by sun and suffering. She thought about what Mrs. Doyle had said about Harland, about him waiting for something. She understood that kind of waiting. Sometimes, when you'd lost enough, when you'd been hurt enough. All you could do was wait and watch. Ready for the next blow life was preparing to deliver. 3 days passed in a blur of back-breaking work. Clara's hands slowly toughened to match her feet, and she learned the rhythms of the boarding house. Which boarders complained most? The merchant. Which tracked in the most dirt? The miners. Which required extra care with their belongings? The surveyor with his mysterious maps and instruments. On the 4th evening, she was serving dinner when the conversation turned, as it increasingly did, to the Morrison gang. They hit Culver's Mill, the surveyor announced, folding his newspaper with theatrical gravity. Burned the general store when the owner couldn't open the safe fast enough. That's only 40 miles south. The marshal should wire for federal help, the merchant suggested, sawing at his beef with determination. These territorial lawmen aren't equipped for this kind of threat. One of the miners snorted. Federal help? You'll be waiting till kingdom come. No, what this town needs is to fort up and arm itself. Every man should... A commotion outside interrupted him. Shouts, running feet, the sound of horses. Clara moved to the window along with several others, peering out into the dusty twilight. A crowd was gathering in the street, centered around a horse with something draped across its saddle. As Clara watched, she realized with growing horror that it was a body, blood still dripping onto the dirt. It's Jim Patterson, someone said. He was riding out to his claim this morning. Shot in the back, another voice added. Found him 2 miles outside town. Through the gathering crowd, Clara saw Harland emerge from the shadows, moving with purpose toward the scene. He examined the body with clinical detachment, then said something to the men gathered around. Whatever he said caused a ripple of agitation through the crowd. Mrs. Doyle pulled Clara back from the window. None of our concern. Get back to serving. But Clara had seen the fear in the faces outside, had heard the whispers that followed Harlan's words. The violence she'd fled was following her, closing in like a tightening noose. The Morrison gang might not be here yet, but their shadow had fallen across Silver Creek, and everyone could feel the storm approaching. That night, unable to sleep, Clara sat on the back steps of the boarding house, watching the stars wheel overhead. The town was quieter than usual. The saloon closing early, people hurrying home behind locked doors. Fear had a way of changing a place, making it smaller, meaner. Couldn't sleep either, she started, then recognized Harlan's voice from the shadows. He was sitting on a wooden crate near the alley, barely visible in the moonlight. I didn't see you there, she said, her heart still racing. Sorry, old habit. He shifted slightly, and she could make out more of his features. You're the new girl at Doyle's. Clara, she offered, surprising herself. Jed Harland. He was quiet for a moment. That was a brave thing. Staying in town after tonight, half the folks will be gone by morning. Nowhere else to go, Clara said simply. He made a sound that might have been understanding. Yeah, I know that feeling. They sat in companionable silence. Two strangers sharing insomnia and unspoken knowledge of what it meant to have nowhere to run. In the distance, a coyote howled, and the sound seemed to carry all the loneliness of the desert. They'll come, Harlan said finally. The gang. This town's too tempting a target to pass up. When they do, it'll be bad. You sound certain. I've seen their work before. They're not just thieves. They enjoy the fear, the power. Jake Morrison. He's got a taste for violence that goes beyond profit. Clara hugged her knees to her chest. Will you leave? No. The word was flat. Final. You? No. He stood then, a fluid movement that spoke of contained energy. Get some sleep if you can, and stay away from the saloon for the next few days. When trouble comes, it usually starts there. He melted back into the shadows before she could respond, leaving Clara alone with the stars and the weight of approaching doom. The red sky at sunset had been spectacular, painting the desert in shades of blood and fire. Her grandmother had always said a red sky at night was a sailor's delight. But Clara suspected that here in the desert, different rules applied. She thought about the body draped over the horse, about the fear in people's eyes, about a quiet man who watched the world like he was waiting for a reckoning. Whatever was coming to Silver Creek, she had a feeling that Jed Harland would be at the center of it. And despite every instinct telling her to keep her distance, she found herself drawn to him like a moth to a flame that promised either warmth or destruction. Perhaps both. The days following Jim Patterson's death passed in a haze of tension and sweat. Clara threw herself into her work at the boarding house, scrubbing floors until her knuckles bled, hauling water until her shoulders screamed in protest. Physical exhaustion was preferable to the anxiety that gripped the town like a fever. Silver Creek had transformed. Where once men had lounged on porches trading lazy conversation, now they clustered in tight groups, hands never far from their weapons. The general store had sold out of ammunition twice over. Women hurried their children indoors before dusk, and the sound of hammering filled the air as people boarded windows and reinforced doors. Mrs. Doyle had become even more demanding, her fear manifesting as sharp criticism of everything Clara did. The sheets weren't white enough, the floors weren't clean enough, the meals weren't hot enough. Clara endured it all in silence, understanding that the older woman was simply trying to control what little she could in a world spinning toward chaos. It was while fetching water from the well behind the boarding house that Clara first noticed Harlan's daily ritual. Every afternoon, as the sun began its descent, he would ride out to a flat stretch of desert just visible from the town's edge. There, alone with the sagebrush and shadows, he would practice. The first time she saw him, Clara had stopped mid-draw on the well bucket, transfixed. He moved with a fluidity that seemed almost dance-like, drawing and firing at targets she couldn't see, reloading with an economy of motion that spoke of countless repetitions. Even from a distance, she could sense the deadly precision in every gesture. "Quit your gawking, girl!" Clara jumped, nearly dropping the bucket. "Mrs." Doyle stood behind her, arms crossed, disapproval etched in every line of her face. "I wasn't—" "Yes, you were. And I'll tell you again. That man is trouble. You think watching him play with guns makes him heroic. I've buried 2 husbands who thought the same about themselves. Guns don't solve problems, they just make different ones." Clara hauled up the water bucket, her cheeks burning. "Yes, ma'am," but she couldn't help stealing glances whenever she was outside, watching that solitary figure in the distance preparing for a violence everyone could feel approaching. The boarding house had gained a new resident, a traveling preacher named Reverend Josiah Whitfield, who'd arrived with a worn Bible and a determination to save Silver Creek's souls before it was too late. He held impromptu services in the parlor, his voice rising and falling in rhythms that reminded Clara painfully of her mother's bedside prayers. "The Lord tests us," he proclaimed one evening, his thin face flushed with fervor. "He sends trials to separate the wheat from the chaff, the faithful from the fallen. This gang that threatens us, they are but instruments of divine judgment. Stand firm in faith, and we shall prevail." The merchant nodded along enthusiastically, while the miners looked skeptical. The surveyor had stopped attending after the first sermon, preferring to study his maps in private. Clara served coffee and tried to remain invisible, but the Reverend's eyes found her anyway. "And you, young woman, where do you place your faith in these dark times?" Every eye in the room turned to her. Clara's hand trembled slightly as she set down the coffee pot. "I believe in being prepared, Reverend." Prepared? With guns and boards across windows? Or prepared in spirit? "Both," Clara said quietly, meeting his gaze. "My mother used to say the Lord helps those who help themselves." Something flickered across the preacher's face, approval or disappointment. She couldn't tell. "Your mother sounds like a wise woman. Is she dead?" The word came out harder than she intended. "If you'll excuse me, I have duties to attend to." She fled to the kitchen, hands shaking now for different reasons. Memory was a luxury she couldn't afford, especially memories of her mother's faith, her gentle prayers that had done nothing to stop her father's fists or save her from that final, fatal pregnancy. 2 mornings later, Clara was carrying water to the horses in the small stable behind the boarding house when disaster struck. One of the mares, already skittish from the town's tension, spooked at something, a snake, perhaps, or just a shadow. The animal reared, knocking Clara backward. The heavy water bucket went flying, and she landed hard in the dirt, the breath driven from her lungs. The mare's hooves came down inches from her head, and Clara rolled desperately, trying to avoid being trampled. The horse was in full panic now, whinnying and kicking, and Clara could see her death in those wild, rolling eyes. Then strong hands grabbed her shoulders, dragging her clear just as the mare's hooves struck where she'd been lying. Clara found herself pressed against the stable wall, Harlan's body shielding her as he spoke in low, soothing tones to the panicked animal. Gradually, impossibly, the mare calmed. Harlan moved slowly, never breaking his stream of gentle words, until he could grasp the halter. Within minutes, the horse was standing quietly, sides heaving but no longer dangerous. "You hurt?" he asked, turning to Clara. She assessed herself, bruised, shaken, but intact. "No, thank you. Again." A ghost of a smile touched his scarred face. "You do seem to find trouble, Miss Clara." It was the first time he'd used her name, and something about the way he said it made her stomach flutter strangely. Up close, she could see lines around his eyes that spoke of sun and wind and time, could smell leather and gunpowder and something uniquely him. The mare gets spooked easy, misses. Doyle should sell her, get something steadier. He was still standing close enough that she could see the pulse in his throat. "You sure you're not hurt?" "I'm fine." But she wasn't, not really. Her heart was racing for reasons that had nothing to do with nearly being trampled. He stepped back, giving her space, and the spell broke. Might want to approach her from the left from now on. She's half blind in the right eye. "How did you know that?" "Same way I know you're favoring your left ankle, even though you say you're not hurt." That almost smile again. "I pay attention." He left before she could respond, and Clara stood there in the stable, ankle throbbing now that he'd mentioned it, wondering what else those dark eyes had noticed. Misses. Doyle was furious about the spilled water and more furious that Harlan had been on her property. "That's twice now he's been sniffing around you. Don't think I don't see what's happening." "Nothing's happening," Clara protested, wrapping her ankle with strips torn from an old petticoat. "And nothing better happen. I won't have scandal in my house. You're a good worker, Clara, but not so good I won't turn you out if you bring shame on my establishment." That evening, as Clara served dinner, the talk was all of preparation. The town had organized a defense committee, with the mayor and several prominent citizens planning watches and defensive positions. Harlan refused to join. The merchant reported with obvious displeasure. "Said he works better alone." "Typical." One of the miners grunted. "Man thinks he's above the rest of us. Or maybe he knows something we don't," the surveyor suggested, looking up from his eternal maps. "I've been asking around. You know he served with the 7th Cavalry, fought in the Indian Wars. That explains the way he moves." The other miner said, "Like he's expecting attack from all sides. Lost his whole unit in an ambush near Fort Bowie." The surveyor continued, clearly enjoying having information others didn't. "Only survivor. Some say he left men behind to save himself. Others say he held off 50 Apache warriors single-handed until reinforcements arrived. Stories grow in the telling," the Reverend observed. "What matters is not a man's past, but his present choices." Clara kept her eyes down, but she was listening intently. Pieces of the puzzle that was Jed Harlan were falling into place. The constant vigilance, the solitary existence, the way he looked at her sometimes like he was seeing ghosts. That night, unable to sleep again, she found herself at the back door, peering into the darkness. She wasn't surprised when his voice came from the shadows. "Can't sleep again. Story of my life lately." She stepped outside, wrapping her shawl tighter. "Is it true, what they said about Fort Bowie?" A long silence. Then, "Parts of it." "Which parts?" "The parts that matter." His voice was flat, discouraging further questions. But then, unexpectedly, he continued. I did lose my unit. 23 men, good soldiers all, and I did survive when they didn't. Clara understood survivor's guilt, understood the weight of being the one who walked away. That's not your fault. No, I was their sergeant. Their lives were my responsibility. She could hear him shift in the darkness. What about you? What are you running from that's got you jumping at shadows and working yourself bloody? The question caught her off guard. What makes you think I'm running? Takes one to know one. Clara hugged herself tighter. My father, after my mother died, he blamed me, said I killed her. The words came easier in the darkness. To this man who understood guilt and ghosts. She died in childbirth when I was 12. The baby, too. He never forgave me for living when they didn't. That's not my fault, I know. Knowing and feeling are different things. She took a shaky breath. He drank more after that, got meaner, finally decided I needed to pay for my sins in other ways. I left before he could collect. The silence stretched between them, full of understanding and unspoken horrors. He's still alive? Harland asked finally. I don't know. Don't care. Good. Some men don't deserve forgiveness. A coyote howled in the distance, and Clara shivered despite the warm night. The Morrison gang, they're really coming, aren't they? Within the week, I'd guess, they've been working their way north systematically. Silver Creek's the biggest prize between here and Prescott. Will we survive? Some will, some won't. His honesty was brutal, but somehow comforting. Stay close to the boarding house when it happens. Mrs. Doyle's got a root cellar that's practically a fortress. You'll be safe there. What about you? Another long pause. I'll do what I do best, which is survive. And make sure the people worth saving survive too. Before Clara could ask if she was one of those people, he was gone, melted back into the desert night like smoke. She stood there for a long time, thinking about guilt and survival, about men who carried their dead like shadows, and women who ran from living ghosts. The next day, she watched him again at his practice, no longer caring if Mrs. Doyle saw. He was preparing for war in the only way he knew how, and Clara found herself saying a prayer for the first time since her mother's death, not for salvation or forgiveness, but for survival. For him, for her, for this dusty town that had become an unlikely refuge. The red sky that evening was more ominous than ever, and the wind carried the scent of distant smoke. Time was running out for Silver Creek, and everyone could feel it. But for the first time since she'd started running, Clara felt something besides fear. She felt ready. The storm came without warning on a Tuesday afternoon, rolling across the desert like a living thing. Clara had seen dust storms before, but nothing like this. The sky turned yellow, then orange, then an ominous red-brown that swallowed the sun. The wind rose from a whisper to a howl in minutes, and suddenly the air was full of sand and grit that stung like needles. Clara was in the yard behind the boarding house, struggling to bring in the washing before it was torn away. The sheets whipped and snapped like living things, and she could barely see through the thickening dust. Mrs. Doyle's voice, calling from the house, was lost in the wind's roar. She'd managed to gather most of the laundry when the full force of the storm hit. The world disappeared into a maelstrom of dust and darkness. Clara dropped the washing basket, covering her face with her apron, but the dust found its way through, coating her throat, filling her lungs. She stumbled toward where she thought the house was, but in the swirling chaos, all directions looked the same. Panic clawed at her chest. Stories flooded back of people found dead just yards from shelter, lost in storms like this. The wind knocked her to her knees, and she crawled forward blindly, one hand stretched out, searching for anything solid. Her fingers found nothing but empty air and stinging sand. She tried to call out, but the storm stole her voice. The world had become a howling void, and she was alone in it, just as she'd always been alone. Perhaps this was fitting, to die as she'd lived, fighting for breath in a hostile world. Then strong hands grabbed her arms, pulling her upright. She couldn't see who it was, But she knew those hands, that solid presence. Harlan pulled her against him, wrapping something, his coat, around them both, creating a small pocket of calmer air. "Hold on to me," he shouted directly into her ear, the only way to be heard over the storm's fury. "Don't let go." She gripped his shirt with both hands as he guided them through the chaos. He moved with sure steps, as if he could see through the impenetrable dust. Clara buried her face against his chest, breathing in the scent of leather and man instead of dust, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her cheek. Time lost meaning in the storm. It could have been minutes or hours before Harlan pulled her through a doorway into blessed stillness. Clara blinked, coughing, and realized they were in an old storage shed behind the abandoned mercantile. "Not the boarding house. We'll wait it out here," Harlan said, his voice hoarse, in the dim light filtering through cracks in the walls. She could see his face was covered in dust, his dark eyes concerned. "You all right?" Clara tried to answer but ended up in a coughing fit instead. Harlan produced a canteen from somewhere and handed it to her. She drank gratefully, washing the grit from her throat. "How did you find me?" she asked when she could speak again. "Saw you from the saloon when the storm hit, figured you'd need help." He was checking the door, making sure it was secure against the wind. "Mrs. Doyle's probably having fits." "She'll have my hide." Clara agreed, but she couldn't bring herself to care. She was alive, and she was here with him, and the storm had created a strange intimacy in their forced shelter. The shed was small, maybe 8 feet square, filled with broken furniture and empty crates. Dust sifted through the cracks, but it was manageable compared to outside. They found a relatively clear corner and sat on some old feed sacks, their shoulders touching in the confined space. "Thank you," Clara said. "Again, you're making a habit of saving me. You're making a habit of needing saving." But there was warmth in his voice. "Though this time it wasn't your fault. These storms come up fast." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the wind rage outside. The shed creaked and groaned but held firm, in the strange twilight created by the storm. Clara felt disconnected from the world, as if they existed in a bubble outside of time. "I never thanked you properly," she said suddenly. "For that first day, those men would have—" "Don't," his voice was sharp. "Don't thank me for basic decency. It's more than most would have done." He turned to look at her then, and in the dim light, his eyes were almost black. "You remind me of someone." "Who?" "My sister, Sarah." The name came out rusty, as if he hadn't spoken it in years. "She had your way of tilting her chin up when the world tried to knock her down. Your stubbornness, too." "Had?" "Typhoid, 4 years ago." He looked away. "I was in Arizona territory, chasing Apache. Got word she was sick, but by the time I got back to Missouri, she was gone. Her husband, too. Left 3 little ones I couldn't take care of." Clara's heart ached for him. "Where are they now?" "With good people. I send money when I can." His laugh was bitter. "Not much of an uncle, am I? Can't even visit without bringing my ghosts with me." Without thinking, Clara reached out and took his hand. His fingers were calloused, scarred, but they closed around hers gently. "You're protecting them by staying away. Sometimes that's the most loving thing you can do." He looked at their joined hands with something like wonder. "You always see the best in things." "No." Clara thought of her father, of the nights she'd prayed for his death. "But I try to see what's true, and the truth is, you're a good man. Jed Harlan, whatever happened at Fort Bowie, whatever you've done to survive, you're good." The wind howled louder, and the shed shuddered. Harlan pulled her closer. "Protective. You don't know what I've done. I know what you haven't done. You haven't taken advantage of a desperate woman. You haven't looked at me like I'm something to be owned or used. You haven't asked for anything in return for your help." She squeezed his hand. "In my experience, that makes you practically a saint." He laughed then, a real laugh that transformed his face. "St. Jed, that's a new one." The storm's fury seemed to intensify. and suddenly a board tore loose from the wall, letting in a torrent of dust and wind. Harland immediately pushed Clara behind him, shielding her with his body as debris whirled through the gap. "We need to block that!" he shouted over the noise. Together they wrestled a heavy crate in front of the hole, Clara holding it in place while Harland braced it with other debris. By the time they finished, they were both coughing, covered in a fresh layer of dust. They collapsed back onto the feed sacks, breathing hard. Clara became acutely aware of how close they were, how his arm was still around her, protective and warm. The rational part of her mind, the part that had kept her alive and moving, told her to pull away, but a deeper part, starved for gentleness, for connection, wanted to burrow closer. "Clara," his voice was rough, uncertain. "Hold me quiet," she whispered, the words escaping before she could stop them. "Please, just for a little while. I'm so tired of being strong." For a moment, she thought he would refuse, that she'd asked too much. Then his arms tightened around her, pulling her against his chest. She felt the tension in his body, the careful restraint, but also the tenderness. "I've got you," he murmured into her hair. "Rest." And she did, for the first time in months, maybe years. Clara let herself relax completely. The storm raged outside, but here in this dusty shelter, in the arms of a man who asked nothing of her but her trust, she felt safe. She must have dozed, because the next thing she knew, the wind had died to a whisper. The sudden quiet was almost as shocking as the storm had been. Through the cracks in the walls, she could see the sky had turned a hazy yellow-gray. "It's passing," Harland said. He hadn't moved, still holding her as if she were something precious and fragile. Clara lifted her head from his chest, meeting his eyes. There was a question there, and an answer she wasn't ready to give. Not yet, maybe not ever. But in that moment, with dust motes dancing in the filtered light and the memory of his heartbeat still echoing in her ears, she did something she'd never done before. She reached up and touched the scar on his face, tracing it gently from ear to jaw. He went very still, barely breathing. "Does it hurt?" she asked. "Not anymore." His voice was barely a whisper. "Clara, you should know." She silenced him by pressing her fingers to his lips. "I know enough. I know you're here. I know you saved me. I know I feel safer with you than I've felt since my mother died. That's enough for now." He caught her hand, pressing it flat against his chest, where his heart beat strong and steady. "When the gang comes, we'll face it, like we faced this storm." She managed a small smile. Together. Something shifted in his expression, a wall coming down. Slowly, giving her time to pull away. He lowered his head. Clara's eyes fluttered closed as his lips found hers, the kiss as gentle as it was hungry, as if he were a man dying of thirst who'd found water but was afraid to drink too deeply. It was Clara who deepened the kiss, who pressed closer, who poured all her loneliness and hope and newfound courage into that connection. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing unsteadily. "Clara," he said, and her name on his lips was like a prayer. "I know," she said. "I know all the reasons this is foolish. I don't care." He rested his forehead against hers. "You should care. I can't offer you anything. No home, no future, no promises. I'm not asking for any of that." She pulled back to look at him. "I'm just asking for now. For whatever time we have before the storm." He finished. Before the storm. They emerged from the shed to find Silver Creek transformed. The storm had stripped paint from buildings, torn signs from their posts, and left drifts of red dust like snow against every vertical surface. People were beginning to emerge, shaking their heads at the damage. Misses. Doyle was indeed furious, but her relief at seeing Clara safe tempered her scolding. "Thought we'd lost you for sure, girl. Thank the Lord, mister. Harland found you." Clara glanced at Jed, who had resumed his usual stoic expression. But when their eyes met, she saw the warmth there, the promise of their shared shelter. "Yes," she said softly. "Thank the Lord." That night, as she swept dust from every corner of the boarding house, Clara thought about storms, the ones that came from nature and the ones that came from men. Both could destroy, but both could also strip away pretense, leaving only what was essential and true. She'd asked him to hold her quiet, and he had. When the real storm came, the one wearing guns and bringing death, she had a feeling that quiet moment in the dust might be the thing that saved them both. The morning after the dust storm dawned eerily quiet, as if the desert itself was holding its breath. Clara woke to find the boarding house covered in a fine layer of red dust that had somehow penetrated even the tightest sealed windows. As she began the monumental task of cleaning, she noticed the atmosphere in town had shifted. The storm had been like a rehearsal for disaster, and it had shown Silver Creek's vulnerabilities all too clearly. By noon, the news arrived with a rider who barely stayed long enough to water his horse. The Morrison gang had struck again, this time at Cedar Falls, just 20 miles south. The entire town bank had been emptied, the sheriff shot dead in the street, and 3 buildings burned when citizens tried to resist. 20 miles, the merchant said, his face pale as he shared the news in Mrs. Doyle's parlor. They could be here by nightfall, or they could pass us by, the Reverend suggested hopefully. Perhaps they'll head east toward... They won't pass us by. The surveyor's voice was grim. Silver Creek is the last major stop before Prescott. We're sitting on the biggest collection of wealth between here and California. They'll come. Mrs. Doyle's hands shook as she poured coffee. Then perhaps it's time we discussed leaving. A strategic withdrawal. Abandoning our homes. You mean, one of the miners slammed his cup down. Running like cowards. Living like sensible people. Mrs. Doyle shot back. What good is pride if you're dead? The argument that erupted was fierce but familiar. Clara had heard versions of it all week. Stay and fight. Run and live. Duty versus survival. She slipped out to continue her work, but her mind was on Jed Harland and their stolen moment in the storm. He'd been absent since yesterday, and his absence felt like a missing tooth her tongue kept finding. That afternoon, Mayor Hendricks called a town meeting. The small church was packed, fear and determination warring on every face. Clara stood in the back with the other women, watching as the men argued over defense strategies. We need every able-bodied man armed and ready. The mayor declared, set up barricades at both ends of Main Street. Guards posted in shifts. With what? Someone called out. Half the men have already left. We've got maybe 20 who can shoot straight, and that's being generous. Then we make do with what we have. The mayor's face was florid with stress. This is our town, our homes. We stand and fight. Easy for you to say, a woman near Clara muttered. You've got that big house with the stone walls. What about those of us in wooden shacks? Clara noticed Harland slip in through a side door, taking position against the wall where he could see everyone. Their eyes met across the crowded room, and something passed between them. A promise, a warning. She wasn't sure which. What about the women and children? Another voice rose. Where do they go when the shooting starts? The church has the strongest walls. The Reverend offered. We can gather the vulnerable here. Make ourselves sitting ducks. You mean, this from Mrs. Doyle, who'd found her courage. Pack us all in one place for them to burn out? The argument continued, growing more heated. Clara watched Harland, saw him studying each speaker, cataloging strengths and weaknesses. When the mayor finally called for volunteers for the defense force, Harland didn't move. But when the meeting broke up, he intercepted Clara outside. Walk with me, he said quietly. They moved away from the crowds, finding relative privacy near the abandoned blacksmith shop. The afternoon sun was brutal, but Clara barely noticed. You're not joining the defense force, she observed. Groups make easy targets, and half those men will run at the first shot. He studied her face. You need to leave town. Tonight. No. Clara. I said no. She lifted her chin in that way he'd commented on. I'm not running anymore. Jed, I'm tired of being afraid. Tired of looking over my shoulder. If they come, they come. You could die. I could die crossing the desert alone too. At least here. She paused, then forced herself to continue. At least here I'm not alone. Something flickered in his eyes. Stubborn woman. Stubborn man. You could leave too, but you won't. That's different. Why? Because you're a man? Because you got ghosts to face. She stepped closer. We've all got ghosts. Jed, the difference is mine are still hunting me. He went very still. What do you mean? Clara hadn't meant to say it, but the words tumbled out. My father, he's not the kind to let things go. If he's still alive, he's looking for me. And a town under siege, people distracted. She wrapped her arms around herself. Sometimes I think I'm running from two storms, not just one. Harlan's expression darkened. If he comes here, he's my problem to handle. No. The word was flat. Final. Not anymore. Before Clara could argue, shouts erupted from Main Street. They ran toward the sound, finding a crowd gathered around a lone rider. The man swayed in his saddle, covered in blood and dust. They're coming, he gasped. Saw them making camp at Willow Springs. 30, maybe 40 riders. They'll hit at dawn. The crowd erupted in panic. Some ran immediately for their homes, presumably to pack. Others pressed closer, demanding more information. Clara saw the mayor trying to restore order, the Reverend praying loudly. Mrs. Doyle standing frozen with shock. Inside, Harlan said urgently, guiding Clara toward the boarding house. Pack light water, food, ammunition if you have it. Whatever happens, stay with Mrs. Doyle in the root cellar. Don't come out until it's over. What about you? I'll do what needs doing. He gripped her shoulders. Promise me, Clara, stay hidden. She wanted to argue, but the intensity in his eyes stopped her. I promise. Good. He pulled her close, kissing her hard and quick. Whatever happens tomorrow, remember, you're the strongest woman I've ever known. You'll survive this. Then he was gone, striding away with purpose. Clara stood there, lips tingling, heart racing, watching him disappear into the chaos of a town preparing for war. The rest of the day passed in a blur of frantic activity. Clara helped Mrs. Doyle prepare the root cellar, hauling down water barrels, food supplies, medical necessities. The space was cramped but solid, carved from the earth and reinforced with thick timbers. At least we'll die together. Mrs. Doyle said with grim humor as they arranged blankets. Though I never thought it would end like this. Thought I'd go peaceful in my bed, not cowering in a hole. We're not going to die. Clara said firmly. We're going to survive, and tomorrow we'll have a story to tell. Mrs. Doyle studied her. You've changed, girl. When you first came here, you were all sharp edges and fear. Now. She shook her head. That Harlan fellow did something to you. Maybe I did something to myself, Clara replied, but she knew the older woman was partly right. Jed had shown her she was worth saving, worth protecting. It had been a long time since anyone had made her feel valuable beyond what she could work or endure. That evening, the boarding house was unusually quiet. The merchant had fled, taking his sample cases and heading north. The miners were with the defense force, drinking liquid courage at the saloon. The surveyor had locked himself in his room with his maps, and the elderly woman had been taken in by relatives on the other side of town. Clara served a simple dinner to those remaining, Mrs. Doyle, the Reverend, and surprisingly, the surveyor, who emerged looking haggard. I've been thinking, he said, unfolding one of his maps. The gang will expect resistance on Main Street. But if they're smart, and Jake Morrison is smart, they'll send riders around to flank us. These arroyos here and here. He pointed to marks on the map. They could bring horses right to the back of town without being seen. Why are you telling us this, Mrs.? Doyle asked suspiciously. The surveyor smiled thinly. Because I'm not really a surveyor. I'm a Pinkerton agent, hired by the railroad to track the Morrison gang. I've been following them for months. The revelation stunned them all into silence. Clara found her voice first. Then why haven't you stopped them? 1 man against 40? I'm an investigator, not a miracle worker. He refolded the map carefully. But I've sent word to the agency. Help is coming, but not in time. We need to survive until it arrives." "How long?" the Reverend asked. "2 days, maybe 3. Might as well be a year." "Mrs." Doyle muttered. They discussed defense strategies until well past dark. The Pinkerton agent, his real name was Thomas Brennan, shared what he knew about the gang's tactics. They favored overwhelming force, shock, and speed. But they could be hurt, could be driven off if the resistance was fierce enough. "The key is making it cost more than it's worth," Brennan explained. "Morrison's practical above all. If he loses too many men taking Silver Creek, he won't have enough to hit Prescott." It was cold comfort, but comfort nonetheless. Clara helped clear the dishes, her mind on Jed, wondering where he was, what preparations he was making. Through the window, she could see men moving in the darkness, setting up barricades, taking positions. The whole town felt like a held breath. She was heading to her cellar room when a hand grabbed her arm, yanking her into the shadows of the back porch. Her scream died as she recognized the smell of whiskey and stale sweat, the cruel grip she'd never forgotten. "Hello, daughter." Clara's blood turned to ice. Her father stood before her, older, grayer, but with the same mean eyes that had haunted her nightmares. "How? You think you can run from family, from your obligations?" His grip tightened painfully. "I've been tracking you for months. Would have caught you sooner, but you kept moving. Then I heard about the gang heading this way. Figured you'd go to ground somewhere, and here you are. Let me go." Clara kept her voice steady despite her terror. "I'm not going back with you." "Oh, yes you are. You owe me, girl. 10 years of raising you, feeding you, and you repay me by running off like a thief in the night?" He leaned closer, and she could see the madness that had always lurked beneath his cruelty. "Your mother would be ashamed." Something snapped inside Clara. All the fear, all the guilt, crystallized into pure rage. "My mother would be glad I got away from you. She knew what you were. That's why she kept trying for another baby, wasn't it? Hoping for a son so I'd be safe." The slap rocked her head back, but Clara didn't cry out. She'd endured worse. "You'll come quiet," her father snarled, "or I'll drag you. Either way, you're leaving with me tonight. There's a preacher 2 towns over who'll marry us proper. Make it all legal. Then you'll do your duty as a daughter should." The implications made Clara's stomach heave. She'd known, deep down, why she'd really run. The looks, the touches that lingered too long, the drunken rambling about her mother's beauty living on in her, but hearing it spoken aloud, here in this place where she'd found a measure of peace. "I'll die first." "No," her father said with terrible certainty. "You won't. You're too much like her, weak, soft. You'll do what you're told, just like she did." She wasn't weak. Clara met his eyes steadily. "She was surviving, but I'm not her. I'm not that 12-year-old girl you could terrorize, and I'm not alone anymore." Her father laughed. "You think anyone in this town cares about you? They're all worried about their own skins. No one's coming to save you, girl." A click of a hammer being cocked proved him wrong. "I'd step away from the lady, if I were you." Jed Harland emerged from the darkness. His gun trained steadily on Clara's father. His expression was calm, almost pleasant, but Clara could see the deadly intent in his eyes. "This ain't your business, mister," her father blustered, but his grip on Clara loosened. "That's where you're wrong." Jed's voice was conversational. "See, everything about Miss Clara is my business. And right now, you're touching something that belongs to me." Clara knew she should object to being claimed like property, but the words sent warmth through her anyway. Her father must have heard the possession in Jed's tone too, because he released her entirely. Stepping back. "She's my daughter. I got rights. You've got nothing." Jed moved closer, never lowering the gun. "I know what you are. I've seen your kind before. Weak men who beat on those who can't fight back. Men who take what they can't earn." His smile was terrible. "Usually. I just kill them. Save everyone the trouble." Clara's father paled. "You can't just murder a man for wanting his daughter back." "Can't I?" Jed seemed to consider this. Town's about to be at war. Lot of confusion in a situation like that? Man could get shot by accident. Tragic, really. Jed, Clara said softly. As much as she hated her father, she didn't want his blood on Jed's hands. Not for her. Clara's got a kind heart, Jed continued. Me, not so much. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to get on whatever nag you rode in on, and you're going to leave. Tonight. Don't stop. Don't look back. Don't ever think about coming after her again, because if I see you again, if I even hear you've been asking about her, I'll hunt you down and kill you slow. That's not a threat, it's a promise. Clara's father looked between them, calculating. Whatever he saw in Jed's eyes made him step back further. This ain't over. Yes, Jed said quietly. It is. For a moment, violence hung in the air like smoke. Then Clara's father spat in the dirt and turned away. You're welcome to the worthless bitch. She killed her mother. You know, she'll probably kill you too. Jed didn't respond, just watched with predator's eyes as the older man shuffled away into the darkness. Only when he was gone did Jed lower his weapon, turning to Clara. You all right? Clara realized she was shaking. How did you know? Saw him skulking around earlier. Figured he was advance scout for the gang until I saw him watching you through the window. He holstered his gun. Why didn't you tell me he might come? I thought I'd run far enough. The shaking was getting worse. He wants to. He thinks because my mother's gone, I should. I know. Jed pulled her into his arms. I know what he wants. It's not going to happen. Clara buried her face against his chest, breathing in his familiar scent. You can't just threaten every problem in my life away. Watch me. He stroked her hair gently. He won't be back. Clara, men like that are cowards at heart. He'll run and keep running. What if you're wrong? Then I'll keep my promise. He pulled back to look at her. I meant what I said. Everything about you is my business now, if you'll have me. Clara searched his face. Even after tomorrow? Even if we survive? Especially then. He cupped her cheek. I've been alone a long time. Clara, thought I was meant to be. But then you came along with your stubborn chin and your brave heart, and suddenly alone didn't feel like enough anymore. I'm trouble, she warned. You said so yourself. Best kind of trouble I ever found. She kissed him then, pouring all her fear and hope and growing love into it. When they broke apart, the town around them was preparing for war. But for this moment, in this shadow-draped corner of the world, they had found peace. Stay safe tomorrow, she whispered. You too. Remember your promise. Stay in the cellar. I will. She touched his scar one more time. Don't you dare die on me. Jed Harland, I just found you. Same goes for you, Clara May. He kissed her once more, quick and fierce. Now get inside. Lock the doors. Tomorrow's coming whether we're ready or not. Clara watched him disappear into the darkness, then went inside to help with final preparations. The fear was still there, but it was different now. She'd faced down one demon tonight and found herself stronger than he was. Tomorrow, Silver Creek would face its demons, and Clara had a feeling that win or lose, the town would never be the same. Neither would she. The night before battle stretched endless and fragile, like spun glass ready to shatter at the slightest touch. Clara couldn't sleep in the root cellar's musty confines, so she climbed the stairs to the kitchen, finding Mrs. Doyle already there, sitting at the table with a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. Couldn't sleep either? The older woman asked. Too much thinking. Clara poured herself coffee from the pot on the stove, grateful for something to do with her hands. I've been through 3 of these in my lifetime, Mrs. Doyle said quietly. Apache raids twice, bandits once, lost my first husband in one, my second in another. She traced the rim of her cup with one finger. You'd think it would get easier, the waiting. It doesn't. They sat in companionable silence, listening to the town's restless sounds, footsteps on wooden sidewalks, hushed voices, the occasional whinny of a nervous horse. Through the window, Clara could see lanterns moving like fireflies as men took their positions. That Harlan fellow, Mrs. Doyle said suddenly. He's sweet on you. Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. I suppose he is. And you're sweet on him? Yes, Mrs. Doyle nodded slowly. I was wrong about him. Saw him organizing the men earlier, quiet-like, not making a fuss, but getting them where they needed to be. He's got the respect of even the troublemakers. She looked at Clara directly. If we survive tomorrow, don't let pride or fear keep you from happiness. I did that once. Still regret it. Before Clara could respond, a soft knock came at the back door. She opened it to find Jed standing there, his face grave in the moonlight. Thought you might be awake, he said. Mind if I come in, Mrs. Doyle stood. I'll give you two some privacy, but keep it proper. We might die tomorrow, but we'll die respectable. Despite her words, she patted Jed's arm as she passed. You keep her safe, Mr. Harland. Yes, ma'am. When they were alone, Jed pulled out a chair and sat heavily. For the first time since she'd known him, he looked tired, vulnerable. How bad is it going to be? Clara asked, sitting across from him. Bad. He didn't sugarcoat it. We've got maybe 18 men who can shoot worth a damn. They've got 40, all experienced killers. Our only advantages are defensive position and desperation. And you, a ghost of a smile. I'm just one man, Clara. Not a miracle worker. You're more than that. She reached across the table, taking his hands. Tell me about your sister. About the good times. He looked surprised by the request. Then, understanding dawned. She was offering him what he'd given her in the storm. A moment of peace, of connection, before the violence came. Sarah was 6 years younger than me, he began, his voice soft with memory. Stubborn as a mule, even as a little thing. Used to follow me everywhere, trying to do whatever I did, drove me crazy. His thumb stroked over Clara's knuckles absently. She had this laugh, like bells ringing. Could light up a whole room with it. What else? She loved horses, had a way with them. Could gentle the wildest colt just by talking to it. Used to say she was going to marry a horse rancher and have a dozen kids who'd all be riders. His voice caught slightly. She did marry her rancher, had 3 beautiful babies. Was working on the dozen when the fever took her. Tell me about them. The children. So he did, painting pictures with words of 3 tow-headed youngsters he'd barely had time to know. The eldest, a boy named after him. Twin girls with their mother's laugh. Clara listened, holding his hands, offering the comfort of witness to his grief. I send money to their aunt, he finished. But I can't. I look at them and see everyone I failed. Their mother, their father, my unit, all the ghosts. You didn't fail them. Life failed them. Disease and war and violence failed them. Clara squeezed his hands. You survived. That's not a sin, Jed. Feels like one sometimes. I know. She thought of her mother, of the baby who'd never drawn breath. But we honor the dead by living, by finding whatever happiness we can in this hard world. He looked at her for a long moment, then stood, pulling her up with him. Dance with me. What? There's no music. Don't need any. He pulled her close, one hand on her waist, the other holding hers. My mother taught me when I was young, said every man should know how to dance proper. They moved slowly around the kitchen, their bodies finding a rhythm in the silence. Clara rested her head against his chest, feeling his heartbeat, steady and strong. The world outside was preparing for death, but here in this simple kitchen, life persisted. I love you, she whispered, the words escaping before she could stop them. His arms tightened around her. Clara, you don't have to say it back. If tomorrow, I needed you to know. He stopped dancing, tilting her chin up to look at him. I love you too. God help me. I do. Tried not to. Tried to keep my distance. But you worked your way right past all my defenses. Good, she said fiercely. I'm glad. He kissed her then, slow and deep, like they had all the time in the world instead of just these stolen hours. When they broke apart, both were breathing unsteadily. I want to ask you something, Jed said, but I need you to be honest, even if it hurts. Clara nodded, bracing herself. Your dreams. Before all this, what did you want from life? The question surprised her. I wanted to be free, to wake up without fear, go to sleep without worry, maybe have a little house somewhere. With a garden. Raise chickens, grow vegetables. She laughed self-consciously. Simple dreams for a simple girl. Not simple. Perfect. He cupped her face gently. If we survive tomorrow, I want to give you those dreams. All of them. The house, the garden, the chickens, the freedom. Jed, I know I'm not much of a prospect. I've got blood on my hands and ghosts in my head, but I also got land up north, near Flagstaff. Bought it years ago, thinking someday. It's good land. Quiet. Safe. Clara's heart was racing. Are you asking me to marry you? I'm asking you to live with me. However, you'll have me. His eyes were vulnerable in a way she'd never seen. I know it's too fast, too much to ask when we might not see sunset tomorrow. But I needed you to know there's a future waiting, if you want it. Yes. The word came out choked with emotion. Yes to all of it. The land, the life, you, especially you. He kissed her again, and this time it tasted like promises, like hope. When footsteps on the stairs made them pull apart, Clara felt like she was glowing from the inside out. Thomas Brennan, the Pinkerton agent, appeared in the doorway. Sorry to interrupt. Harland, we need you. Scouts report movement to the south. Jed's expression shifted. The soldier replacing the lover. How far? 5 miles. Maybe less. They're taking their time, probably planning to hit at first light. Brennan looked between them, understanding dawning. I'll give you a moment. When he left, Jed pulled Clara close one more time. Remember your promise. Stay in the cellar. I will. You remember yours too. Come back to me. Always. He pressed something into her hand, a small leather pouch. This was Sarah's. Her wedding ring is inside, and our mother's before her. Whatever happens, I want you to have it. Clara clutched the pouch, tears threatening. I'll keep it safe. Keep yourself safe. That's all I ask. One more kiss, fierce and quick. And then he was gone, heading into the darkness where death waited. Clara stood in the kitchen holding 3 generations of love in her palm and made her own promise. They would survive this. They had to. She'd spent too many years running from life to lose it now that she'd finally found something worth standing still for. Mrs. Doyle returned, took one look at Clara's face, and pulled her into a surprising hug. Come on, girl. Let's get the others and head to the cellar. It'll be light soon. They gathered the remaining souls in the boarding house, Reverend Whitfield clutching his Bible, 2 traveling salesmen who'd had the misfortune of arriving yesterday, and an ancient Mexican woman who worked as a laundress and spoke no English, but whose eyes held the wisdom of someone who'd survived worse. In the cellar, they arranged themselves as comfortably as possible. Clara kept the leather pouch pressed against her heart, thinking of Jed out there in the darkness, preparing to stand between the town and destruction. Should we pray? The Reverend asked. Couldn't hurt. Mrs. Doyle replied. So they prayed, each in their own way. Clara's prayers were wordless, more feeling than thought, gratitude for love found, pleas for more time, promises to the God she'd thought had abandoned her. She prayed for Jed's safety, for the town's survival, for the dawn to bring victory instead of death. Outside, a rooster crowed, confused by the pre-dawn activity. The sound was so normal, so everyday, that it made Clara want to laugh and cry simultaneously. Life went on. Even in the face of approaching catastrophe, roosters still crowed. Coffee still needed making. Hearts still beat with stubborn hope. Whatever happens, she said aloud. I'm glad to be here with all of you. Mrs. Doyle squeezed her hand. That's the spirit, girl. We'll face whatever comes together. The Reverend began to sing softly. An old hymn Clara remembered from childhood. One by one, the others joined in, their voices mixing in the darkness. Even the Mexican woman hummed along. The melody universal even if the words weren't. As the first pale light of dawn filtered through the cellar's single small window, Clara felt an odd peace settle over her. She'd spent so long running from her past, from her father, from the possibility of pain. But here, in this dusty cellar in a town she'd stumbled into by accident, she'd found something worth staying for, worth fighting for, worth dying for if necessary. The leather pouch warm against her skin. She closed her eyes and pictured the future Jed had painted. A house on quiet land, chickens in the yard, vegetables in neat rows, him coming home at sunset, her meeting him at the door. Simple dreams, but precious beyond measure. Somewhere above them, a shot rang out. The battle for Silver Creek had begun. The first shot was followed by an eerie silence, as if the entire town held its breath. Then came the thunder, dozens of guns firing at once, the sharp crack of rifles mixing with the deeper boom of shotguns. The cellar walls muffled the sound but couldn't hide the reality of what was happening above. Clara pressed her hand against the leather pouch at her chest, feeling the ring inside through the soft material. Each gunshot made her flinch, wondering if it was aimed at Jed, if it found its mark. "Sounds like they're hitting Main Street hard," one of the salesmen whispered, his face pale in the dim light. More gunfire. Closer now. Through the small window, Clara could see smoke beginning to rise. The acrid smell of gunpowder seeped into their shelter, mixing with the musty earth scent. "The Lord is my shepherd," Reverend Whitfield began, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "I shall not want." The others joined in, the familiar words offering comfort. Clara mouthed along, but her mind was above, with the men defending the town. With Jed, a tremendous crash shook the building, raining dust from the ceiling. Misses. Doyle grabbed Clara's arm. That was close. Too close. Clara could hear shouts now, men calling orders, cries of pain. The battle was moving, flowing through the town like a tide of violence. She remembered what Thomas Brennan had said about the Arroyos, about flanking movements. Were the defenders ready? "I need to help," she said suddenly. "Don't you dare!" Misses. Doyle's grip tightened. "You promised that man you'd stay here, but I can't just sit." Another crash, and this time Clara heard glass shatter above them. The boarding house was taking fire. She thought of all the work she'd put into cleaning those windows, polishing those floors, and felt an absurd anger at the destruction. "Clara, no, Mrs." Doyle tried to hold her back, but Clara pulled free. "I'm not going to fight," she said. "But they'll be wounded. They'll need water, bandages. I can help with that." Before anyone could stop her, she was up the stairs, pushing open the cellar door. The scene that greeted her was chaos. Smoke filled the air, thick and choking. Through the kitchen window, she could see buildings on fire, men running, the flash of gunfire from windows and doorways. Clara grabbed a bucket, filled it from the water barrel, and seized the clean rags she'd washed just yesterday. As she reached the front door, a figure stumbled onto the porch, one of the miners, blood streaming from a shoulder wound. "Inside," she ordered, dropping her supplies to support him. "Sit here." She worked quickly, tearing away his shirt to expose the wound. The bullet had passed through cleanly. Thank God, as she pressed cloth against both entry and exit wounds. The miner groaned. "They came from 3 directions," he gasped. "Just like Brennan said they would. We were ready for them on Main Street, but they sent riders around." "Where's Jed Harland?" Clara couldn't help asking. "Last I saw, he was at the livery stable, picking off anyone who tried to flank us from the east. Man's a demon with a rifle. Must have dropped 6 or 7 already." Relief flooded through her, quickly followed by more fear. 6 or 7 meant he was drawing attention, making himself a target. "Stay here," she told the miner. "Keep pressure on that wound." She grabbed her supplies and headed for the door again. The street was a battlefield. Bodies lay in the dust, some moving, some still. The general store was fully ablaze, flames leaping to the buildings on either side. Through the smoke, she saw defenders crouched behind overturned wagons and water barrels, firing at attackers she couldn't see. A man crawled toward her, one of the townsmen, his leg twisted at an unnatural angle. Clara ran to him, dragging him into the relative shelter of a doorway. His femur was broken, bone showing through torn flesh. All she could do was tie it off above the wound to slow the bleeding. "The bank," he gasped. "They're trying to break into the bank." Of course, the Morrison gang wasn't here for random violence. They wanted the wealth Silver Creek had accumulated. Clara looked down the street and saw riders circling the sturdy brick building that housed the bank and the mayor's office above it. More wounded staggered into view. Clara worked frantically, doing what she could with water and cloth and determination. Some she could help, others were beyond her skill, and she held their hands as they died, whispering words of comfort she wasn't sure she believed. The sun climbed higher, revealing the full scope of the battle. Half of Main Street was burning. Bodies littered the ground, attackers and defenders alike. The thunder of guns had become sporadic, both sides running low on ammunition. Clara was bandaging a head wound when she heard a familiar voice roar in pain. Her head snapped up, searching desperately through the smoke. There, near the livery stable, Jed was on the ground, clutching his side, his rifle fallen beyond reach. 3 riders were bearing down on him. "No!" The word tore from Clara's throat as she ran, not thinking, only knowing she had to reach him. She scooped up a fallen pistol as she ran, the weight unfamiliar in her hand. Jed was trying to crawl to cover, leaving a trail of blood in the dust. The lead rider raised his gun, aiming down at the wounded man. Clara didn't remember pulling the trigger. The gun bucked in her hand, the shot going wide but close enough to make the rider flinch, his own shot missing. All 3 attackers turned toward her, and Clara knew with crystal clarity that she was about to die. Then Thomas Brennan appeared from nowhere, his guns blazing. 2 riders fell before they could react. The third tried to flee but didn't make it 10 feet before Brennan's bullet found him. Clara dropped the pistol and ran to Jed, falling to her knees beside him. Blood seeped between his fingers where he pressed against his side. "You promised," he gritted out. "You promised to stay in the cellar." "You promised to come back to me," she shot back, tearing strips from her petticoat. "Can't do that if you're dead." Brennan helped her get Jed into the stable, out of the line of fire. The wound was bad, a deep furrow along his ribs that bled freely. Clara worked with desperate efficiency, packing the wound, wrapping it tight. "The gang's pulling back," Brennan reported, reloading his weapons. "We hurt them more than they expected, but they'll regroup. Come again." "How many did we lose?" Jed asked, his face gray with pain. "Too many, but we're still standing." Brennan looked at Clara with something like respect. "That was brave, what you did. Stupid, but brave. I couldn't let them." She couldn't finish, her hands shaking now that the immediate danger had passed. "Clara!" Jed caught her hand, stilling its tremors. "I'm all right, thanks to you." Gunfire erupted again from the direction of the bank. Brennan cursed. "They're making another push. I have to go." "Go," Jed said. "I'll be fine." When they were alone, Clara helped Jed sit up against a hay bale. His face was tight with pain, but his eyes were alert. "You could have been killed," he said. "So could you." She checked his bandage, satisfied that the bleeding had slowed. "I'm not going to apologize for saving your life." Stubborn woman, but there was warmth in his voice. "What's the situation out there?" Clara described what she'd seen. The fires, the wounded, the bodies in the street. Jed listened grimly. "They'll try once more," he said. "Morrison won't leave empty-handed. Not after losing this many men. He'll throw everything at the bank. Can we hold? Maybe, if the townspeople don't break." He tried to stand, grimacing. "I need to get back out there. You need to rest." Clara pushed him back down. "You've done enough. It's not enough until they're gone or we're dead." But he didn't try to rise again. Outside, the gunfire intensified. Clara could hear shouting, the crash of breaking wood. The final assault had begun. She looked at Jed, torn between staying with him and helping the other wounded. "Go," he said, reading her face. "Do what you need to do. Just be careful." Clara kissed him quickly. Don't you dare die while I'm gone." She plunged back into the chaos. The scene was even worse than before. The defenders were falling back, overwhelmed by the gang's desperate assault. She saw the mayor go down, clutching his chest. 2 more buildings were burning. Then, impossibly, she heard a new sound, a bugle call, clear and military. Over the ridge to the north, a dust cloud announced new arrivals, the cavalry or Pinkerton reinforcements, or both. It didn't matter. Help had come. The Morrison gang saw it too. Their assault faltered, then broke entirely. Men who'd been pressing forward turned and fled, abandoning their wounded, their purpose forgotten in the face of approaching retribution. "They're running!" someone shouted. "They're running!" A ragged cheer went up from the survivors. Clara sagged against a wall, suddenly exhausted. It was over. They'd survived, but at such cost. As the dust settled, she could see the full devastation. A third of Main Street was gone, either burning or already reduced to ash. Bodies lay everywhere. The wounded cried out for water, for help, for mercy. Clara worked through it all, bandaging, comforting, organizing. The arriving soldiers, for that's what they were, a cavalry unit that had been trailing the gang, helped fight the fires and round up the gang members who hadn't escaped. It was near sunset when she finally made it back to the stable. Jed was where she'd left him, but his color was better. And Brennan was with him, sporting his own collection of bandages. 12 dead on our side. Brennan reported quietly, including Mayor Hendricks and 3 of the miners. Maybe 6 more won't make it through the night. The gang lost 23 that we've counted, plus 8 captured. Morrison? Jed asked. Got away. Him and maybe a dozen others, but they're finished. Too few left to threaten anyone. Brennan stood, wincing. The Army's setting up a field hospital. They want to move you there. I'm fine here, Jed said. His eyes on Clara. Brennan looked between them and smiled slightly. I'll let them know. He tipped his hat to Clara. Ma'am, town owes you a debt. You saved lives today. When he was gone, Clara sat beside Jed, suddenly too tired to stand. We survived. We did. He pulled her against his uninjured side. Though you nearly gave me a heart attack, running out into gunfire like that. I told you I was done running. She rested her head on his shoulder. Besides, someone had to save your stubborn hide. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of a town beginning to heal. Tomorrow would bring grief and rebuilding, funerals and fresh starts. But tonight, they were alive, they were together, and that was enough. The offer still stands, Jed said quietly. The land up north, the quiet life. Clara fingered the leather pouch still at her chest, feeling the promise of the rings inside. When do we leave? Soon as I can ride. This town's seen enough of violence. Time to let it heal without us as reminders. And us? Clara asked. Will we heal? Jed was quiet for a long moment. Maybe, together, maybe we will. As darkness fell over Silver Creek, Clara closed her eyes and let herself believe it. They'd faced the storm and survived. Now it was time to build something from the wreckage. A life, a future, a love strong enough to weather whatever came next. The war was over. The healing could begin. Dawn broke golden over Silver Creek, painting the devastation in gentler hues. 3 days had passed since the battle, and the town bore its scars like badges of honor. Where buildings had burned, men were already clearing debris and marking out foundations for new structures. The sound of hammers rang through the air, a percussion of determination that spoke of life continuing despite death's recent visit. Clara stood on the porch of the boarding house, one of the few buildings on Main Street to survive intact, watching the rebuilding begin. Her hands were still stained with blood that wouldn't wash clean, and exhaustion sat heavy on her shoulders. But she couldn't rest. Not yet. You need to sleep. Mrs., Doyle said, joining her with 2 cups of coffee. You've been going for 3 days straight. There's still so much to do. Clara accepted the coffee gratefully. The wounded need tending. Families need feeding. And others can handle that for a few hours. The older woman's voice was firm but kind. You've done more than your share, girl. Time to let others step up. Clara knew she was right, but it was hard to stop. Keeping busy meant not thinking about those who hadn't survived, about the children now orphaned, the wives now widowed. It meant not remembering the feel of men dying under her hands, their blood mixing with the dust of Main Street. "How's Mr. Harland?" Mrs. Doyle asked. "Better. The doctor says he'll make a full recovery." Clara smiled slightly, though keeping him still is a challenge. He keeps trying to help with the rebuilding. "Men," Mrs. Doyle shook her head. "Can't admit when they need caring for. Speaking of which, that Pinkerton fellow was looking for you. Said to tell you he'll be at the church." Clara found Thomas Brennan standing among the fresh graves behind the church, his hat in his hands. 12 wooden crosses marked the defenders who'd fallen, with space left for the 6 who still lingered between life and death. "Miss Thompson," he greeted her. "How are you holding up?" "I'm managing." She looked at the graves, reading the names carved into the wood. She'd known most of these men, had served them meals, washed their clothes. Now they were gone. Their stories ended. What will happen now? The army will stay for a few weeks, help maintain order. The surviving gang members will be tried, probably hanged. The town will rebuild, stronger than before. He paused. And heroes will be remembered. I'm no hero, Mr. Brennan. The men you saved would disagree, as would I. He reached into his coat, producing an envelope. "This came for you with the military courier from Kansas." Clara's blood chilled as she recognized the handwriting. Her father's. With trembling hands, she opened the letter. "Girl, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. Got the consumption. Doctor says, maybe it's God's punishment. Maybe it's just life. Don't matter now. I was wrong. About you, about your mother, about everything. The drink made me mean. But that's no excuse. You were right to run. Right to find better. I'm leaving what little I got to the church there. Maybe it'll help rebuild what I had a hand in destroying. Don't come back. Make your life out there. Your mother would be proud. Henry Thompson." Clara stared at the letter, waiting to feel something. Relief, sadness, anger. Instead, there was only a hollow emptiness where her fear of him used to live. "Bad news?" Brennan asked gently. "Old news." She folded the letter carefully. The past catching up, then letting go. They stood in silence for a moment. Then Brennan cleared his throat. "I'll be leaving tomorrow. Reports to file, other cases to pursue. But I wanted to thank you, and to tell you that if you and Harland ever need anything, the Pinkerton Agency won't forget what you did here." After he left, Clara remained among the graves, thinking about endings and beginnings, about the strange ways life circled back on itself. Her father was dying or dead, freeing her from a shadow she'd carried for years. The town that had taken her in as a stranger was honoring her as a hero. And somewhere in the boarding house, a scarred soldier was waiting for her, offering a future she'd never dared dream of. She found Jed sitting up in bed, clean-shaven for the first time since she'd known him, wearing a fresh shirt Mrs. Doyle had procured from somewhere. He looked younger, less burdened, though pain still tightened the corners of his eyes. "You clean up nice," Clara said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Mrs." Doyle insisted, said if I was going to court you proper, I needed to look the part. He took her hand. "How are you?" "Tired, sad, grateful." She showed him the letter. He read it in silence, then pulled her against him. "How do you feel about it?" "I don't know. Empty, maybe. Like a debt's been paid that I didn't know was owed." She traced patterns on his chest. "Is it wrong that I can't mourn him?" "No. Some people forge their own chains. Doesn't mean we have to wear them." He kissed her forehead. "Speaking of chains, I've been thinking. Dangerous habit. Hush. I've been thinking about what comes next. The land up north is good, but it's isolated. Might be better to find somewhere with a town nearby. A community. Somewhere you could have that garden and those chickens, but also friends, a church, maybe a school when He trailed off, color rising in his cheeks. "When what?" Clara prompted, though her heart was already racing. "When we have children. If you want them. I mean, we haven't talked about it, and maybe you don't." She silenced him with a kiss. "I want them. I want everything. The land, the garden, the children, all of it." "Good." He reached under his pillow, producing a small box. "Then maybe you should wear this." Inside was a simple gold band, worn smooth with age. Clara recognized it from the leather pouch, his sister's wedding ring. "It's not fancy," Jed said nervously. "We can get something newer if you prefer. It's perfect." Clara held out her hand, watching as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit as if made for her. "When?" "Soon as I can stand before a preacher without falling over. Reverend Whitfield already agreed to do the ceremony." He grinned. "Mrs. Doyle's planning the reception. I think she's invited half the territory." Clara laughed, the first real laugh she'd managed since the battle. "We're getting married in a town that's half burned down. Seems fitting, building something new from the ashes." His expression grew serious. "If you're sure, I know it's fast. No, we haven't known each other long. I've known you my whole life." Clara interrupted. "I just hadn't met you yet." 2 weeks later, on a crisp morning with the sky endless and blue, Clara Mae Thompson married Jedediah Samuel Harland in the partially rebuilt church of Silver Creek. She wore a dress borrowed from Mrs. Doyle's mysterious trunk, altered to fit and cleaned until it almost looked new. Jed stood straight and tall despite his healing wound, his eyes never leaving her face as she walked down the aisle. The church was packed. Townspeople who'd survived the battle, soldiers who'd stayed to help rebuild, even some of the wounded who'd insisted on attending. Thomas Brennan had delayed his departure to serve as Jed's best man, while Mrs. Doyle stood with Clara, tears streaming down her usually stern face. "Dearly beloved," Reverend Whitfield began, "we gather in this place of sorrow and triumph to celebrate new beginnings." Clara barely heard the words. She was lost in Jed's eyes, in the promise she saw there. They'd both come to Silver Creek running from ghosts, had found each other in violence and chaos. Now they stood in a church with holes in its roof, surrounded by people who'd bled for their town, making vows that felt as solid as the mountains. "I, Clara Mae, take you, Jedediah." The words came easily, truthfully, to have and to hold, for better or worse, in sickness and in health. She'd already proven those vows in dust and blood. Now she claimed them in joy. When Reverend Whitfield pronounced them man and wife, when Jed kissed her with tender reverence while the congregation cheered, Clara felt something settle in her chest. Not an ending, but a beginning. Not a destination reached, but a journey started together. The reception was held in the street, tables cobbled together from salvaged wood, food contributed by everyone who could spare it. There was music, a fiddle and guitar that had survived the fire, and dancing on the packed earth where blood had so recently flowed, life asserting itself with stubborn joy. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Clara and Jed sat on the boarding house porch, watching their neighbors celebrate. Tomorrow they would leave for the land up north, start the hard work of building a home. But tonight, they were simply two people who'd found each other against all odds. "No regrets?" Jed asked, his arm around her shoulders. "None." Clara touched the ring on her finger, thinking of all the women who'd worn it before her, all the love it had witnessed. "You? Only that it took so long to find you." She leaned into him, content. Down the street, someone had lit lanterns in the windows of the rebuilt shops, beacons of hope in the gathering darkness. Children played in the dust, their laughter bright and careless. Men and women who'd faced death together now faced life the same way, with courage, with community, with stubborn hope. "Look," Jed said, pointing to the horizon where the first stars were appearing. "Clear skies ahead." Clara smiled, remembering another night when she'd sat barefoot and desperate, watching these same stars, wondering if she'd run far enough. Now she knew the answer. She'd run exactly far enough straight into the arms of the man beside her, straight into a life worth living. Yes, she agreed, taking his hand. Clear skies ahead, as the stars brightened over Silver Creek, over the ashes and the rebuilding, over the graves and the new gardens already being planned. Clara May Harland closed her eyes and gave thanks. For survival, for love, for the beautiful, terrible, precious gift of a future she'd never dared imagine. The girl who'd begged "Hold me" quiet in the dust had found her voice, her strength, her home, and in the heart of a town that had faced its worst fears and survived. Two wounded souls had discovered that sometimes the greatest courage isn't in running or fighting, but in choosing to stay, to build, to love despite all the reasons not to. The Wild West had tested them with its violence and vastness, but it had also given them its greatest gift, the freedom to become who they were meant to be, together. Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story. I hope Clara and Jed's journey touched your heart as much as it touched mine while sharing it. I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from. Drop a comment and let's connect across the miles. If you enjoyed this tale of courage and romance in the American frontier, please subscribe to Wild West Campfire for more authentic stories that bring the Old West to life. Share your thoughts about Clara and Jed's story below. What moment moved you most? Until we meet again around the campfire, keep riding toward your own clear skies ahead.